Thank you for listening to SimpliPodcast. This is Captain Alon Pereg. In our podcasts, we bring you different aspects of the world of flying with the intention of making those who are afraid of it better understand the issues related to passenger planes. Today, we will talk about dealing with the fear of flying, and we will meet a man who has been successfully dealing with this phenomenon for years. And we will hear from him about the path that he took, as well as about an interesting event he experienced recently. I don't know Martin Esquenazi personally, but I was exposed to the posts that he makes from time to time in the Facebook support group for those who are afraid of flying. And I was deeply impressed by the point of view from which he observes the fascinating world of aviation. SimpliPodcast with Martin Esquenazi, ready for takeoff. Martin, thank you for joining me for another SimpliPodcast by SimpliFly.
Thank you, Captain Alon. It's a pleasure, to be here.
Thank you. So what brought you to feel bad about flying, Martin?
It's a long journey. I'm always been, an aviation nerd. I always like planes and everything that, encompass, that world. However, being, up there, 41,000 feet up in the air is a different story. So everything that, we've seen, from down here, we certainly do not experience, when we are up there. And I feel frustrated by that because, having that passion that I have, for those big birds and the whole world of aviation, I thought that I needed to do something about it.
But what triggered the fear, or was it there all the time?
I think that it was there all the time. However, when I was younger, I didn't realize, how, deep it was until we grew up. And I think that, when we grow up and, we start, building a family, you start taking care of other things and you start worrying about things. Yes. And they're like, what if? That what if is, what kind of, start growing within me. And that's, what created, I won't call it, a fear. I will call it, a very uncomfortable set of moments from the takeoff all the way, to whatever weather, we'll have up for us up there.
I meet many people like you who are uncomfortable flying, and the fear, if it's not really taken care of, then it grows with time. First of all, becoming parents is a trigger that boosts all our fears because we are now parents and responsible to others. And flight after flight, if we have bad experience, then the next experience will be like a vicious circle that accelerates in itself. But in your work, you have to fly very often. And since you have to do it, if I am not mistaken, every week, how do you deal with this every week?
Yep, I do every week. As a matter of fact, tomorrow I'm flying, from Texas, to California. And I'm going to do, kind of, a little bit of what you do. As a professional, I'm going to do it, from the business standpoint. I'm going to be going to California, staying one day in California, then going to the East Coast, to New York, staying 2 days in New York, going back to California. Those, we call it transcontinental flights.
Yes.
And then staying in California 2 days, then going back to Texas, then from Texas to Cincinnati, and then back to Texas. All that in 5 days. So, yeah, that is, for any business person, that's kind of a norm. For any business person with the uncomfort of being up in the air, that is not the norm. And then you need to prepare, differently. You touch on very important points, earlier when you said that, once we became parents, we are responsible for others. Yes. And that's, point blank. That's exactly, what happens. At the same time, what I believe is also, being out of control. When we are, business, a business person like me, we are in control, when we do a meeting, when we put a project together, we're always kind of in control and, we work with a team to be in control. When we are, 39, 41,000 feet up in the air, we lose that control. And then I'm like, what's going on now? So anything that, is completely out of control, that enhances, that uncomfortability. I like to keep the word fear out, in my case at least, because it's a negative word. And, I'm trying to work with the uncomfort word, which for me is a little bit easier, because I'm like, if it's something uncomfortable, I can turn it into comfortable. For something that is fear, for me, is difficult, to take the fear out of someone, if that makes sense.
It makes perfect sense. So we turn uncomfortable to comfortable, but how do you compensate for the loss of control? Because you obviously don't have the control that I have when I'm flying. How do you compensate for that?
That's a great question. And it's everything up here. And you need to be in control of your feelings and in control of what you can control. In life, we think that we are in control when we are not. Yes. If I'm driving a car, I am comfortable. I'm driving very comfortable because I think that I'm in control. And I might be to a certain point, but I'm not in control of what the other one is driving. So he or she can easily, jump into me and, crash me. And you know what? I will have an accident. So I need to use that logic when I'm up in the air. I can be in control of certain things. I got a few tips. I try to sit, on the window. I like to look out in the window. I like to look what is going on. That gives me a little bit of control. I like to choose my seat. I don't like to fly on those airlines that, they're low-cost airlines. And I understand that some people cannot afford other ones. But when you're in those airlines that you cannot choose your seat, that's another thing that I'm not in control. So I don't like. So I try to put myself in a situation that I can control as much as I can. Number one, I choose my flights. Number two, I choose my seats. Number three, I open the window and I look out. Number four, I try to meet the crew. So that gives me a sense of control, to the point that I'm like, okay, up to here, because I'm not going to fly the plane, obviously, right? But at least the rest, I can control it. Whatever I cannot control, I need to use my logic and say, Martin, what is that, it really bothers you? You're 39 feet up in the air here. There's two people, 3 or 4, depending on the aircraft, that they're flying this aircraft. And these people, they have families too, and they devoted their life for a passion first, then a profession. And you still concerned? Something is not right. So I played that game in my mind and I answer to myself, and that gives me a sense of control.
So if I'm capturing many aspects that you said, then many people are confronting a problem of not being in control. And Martin is just telling us that actually in real life, when we think that we have control, we are not. And that's okay. That's perfectly okay. But then Martin is trying to create an environment in flight in which he has as much control as possible. First of all, he chooses his flight, he chooses his seat, he wants it to be comfortable and know what's going to happen. He opens the window, I will return to it in a minute, and he meets the crew as much as possible before the flight to know about things. And I think it was Francis Bacon 400 years ago who said that knowledge means power. And actually what Martin is doing, he is educating himself in the flight. Do you do other things in order to educate yourself about flying?
Yes. And I, again, as an aviation geek, I like to learn more about the aircraft that I'm flying. Tomorrow I'm flying on an Airbus A321neo. What is neo? Neo, the new engines that, they're putting on those airplanes. But knowing what the plane is, I try not to go to the media frenzy and see how many accidents that type of aircraft had. Yes. On the contrary, I go and I see how many airplanes of that configuration are flying right now. So I try to educate myself as much as possible. First of all, because it's a passion that I have, for aircraft, and my business also. I work for a company that we treat parts for engines in the
Ah,
airplanes. So
okay.
I know the whole process of safety behind it. So I try to educate myself prior to the flight. So it's exciting when I'm going to fly it on a 787, which I believe that's the plane that you're currently flying,
That's mine. Yes.
787-900, which is amazing, and many compare with the Airbus 350 or 787-800, so forth and so on. So the more that I know about the aircraft as well, the more that I can get in tune with the noises, with the timing, how long will it take, for that particular aircraft, to reach, cruising altitude. I listen to the messages of the pilot. If the pilot is going to say we're going to fly at 35,000, I know that 35,000 usually, it's going to take, 20 to 25 minutes, depending on the configuration for the plane to reach that. All that keeps my mind busy and in tune with the flight. If you're afraid of flying and you try to put your mind somewhere else in a magical world, with anything that is outside there, I think that you're tricking your mind. And in my particular case, it doesn't work. I prefer to bring my mind into the reality. I'm going to be on a plane. I'm going to be in this particular aircraft. This is what I'm going to do. This is how long it's going to be the flight. This is what I'm going to be sitting. That gives me that sense of control that it will keep my mind busy throughout that flight.
And in the human mind, there are unique features that made us as a species very unique. One of them is that we have to append to any input an explanation. We cannot be calm if we heard something or we felt something and we cannot attribute to it any explanation. That's one thing. The second thing is human being can imagine. So we can sit in the plane and imagine what can happen. Okay? And the third, let's say, feature of the human mind, that when we don't have an explanation that we know for sure about something, that our mind thinks of the worst case. So in a vacuum-like situation that we don't know what is the meaning of something, then our mind will interpret it as a bad signal. Now, if Martin knows how much time it's going to take to take off and what to expect, then he has more answers to questions that might arise and does not create a vacuum in which his mind will inject bad assumptions. So knowledge is power is very, very important message that we all can take from what Martin just said to us. Learn about it, understand what's happening, and even sometime predict. Let's think about this scenario. You take off, and approximately 45 seconds after the liftoff, you hear the engines like spool down, like reduce the power. And if you don't know anything about it, then you think, oh my God, we're going to crash because we lost the engines. But if you knew from before, and in SimpliFly, for example, in the takeoff clip, we explain about it. You know to predict that it's going to happen, then your mind will wait for it, will anticipate, and will not create a disaster in your mind. And that's what Martin just told us about. You want to share your vision about it, your view about it, Martin?
Absolutely. What you just mentioned is something that at the beginning I was a little bit concerned too. Sometimes, depending on the aircraft, and, for those that they're more knowledgeable about this, excuse my ignorance for not using the right terms. But, when the plane is taking off, sometimes, you feel that your body, goes back and, the engines, the rumble of the engines slow down. And you're only, maybe a couple of thousand feet, from the ground. And you're like, what's going on? Well, it's very simple. Some airports, some areas, they have, special procedures that, the planes, they need to reduce the power in order for noise. That would be one of them. Another one would be that, there's traffic. And the plane, needs to reduce the speed for traffic. Another one would be that, your takeoff, angle, was too deep. And you're going faster than you should in order to prevent, to keep the lift. There's millions of things. So rather than, getting your mind fed by all those scenarios, enjoy the liftoff. And I know that it may be completely crazy what I'm saying, for those that they're fearful of flying, but liftoff is just great. Once you see the ground at your same level, and then all of a sudden it becomes, smaller, smaller, smaller. And if you do it, in the early hours of the day, you have amazing sunrises. Or, late at night, you got amazing sunsets. There's always a silver lining to flying. There's always, something gorgeous on the other side. Otherwise, there will not be millions of pilots, all around the world and, doing this as a passion. So me as a passenger, I try to piggyback on that and be a little bit of that passion that the pilots have and try to put my uncomfortable moments of flying, aside and cover them, with knowledge and the pure, joy of flying.
I totally agree with this. And couple of days ago, you shared with the members of the Fear of Flying support group an emergency landing that you have experienced lately. Can you tell us a little bit about what was the event and how did you feel about it?
Yeah, absolutely. Emergency landing, first thing that comes to our mind. Oh my gosh, poor guy. I'm okay. I still got my 10 fingers. Everything is totally fine. But the word emergency landing is like, wow, what happened? Well, that's what it was. It was an emergency landing. Why? Because it was not a planned landing, and it was something that the crew decided to do as an emergency to avoid a potential catastrophe. I was on a flight with my family on vacation. We went to Europe from Texas. And coming back, we flew from Frankfurt to Dallas, 787-900. From American Airlines, a plane that was delivered to American in 2017, fairly new plane, loved it. I was sitting at the first row of economy class, so right behind business class, on the window. So I was on the F side, not the A, not on the left, but on the right, where the co-pilot would sit.
Yes.
And and I usually never sleep on planes. I can doze down a little bit, but never sleep. And I usually like to put, my earphones. So that will help me, with all the noises and also, kind of calm down. And I look at the map. I love looking at the map. Don't ask me why. I like to know the altitude, so forth and so on.
Knowledge is power.
Yeah, there you go. Normal takeoff. Totally normal takeoff. We bank, to the right. We bank then to the left until, we got our designated, route. We climb all the way, to 35,000 feet. Clear weather. It was very smooth. The 787, for those of you that, didn't have the pleasure of flying, you have to, not because, Captain Alon is one of the captains of that plane, but it's just a smooth plane. I mean, I don't know, the specific features that this plane has, but I know that has some sensors that it will mitigate turbulence, and it's just very smooth, very, very, very smooth. Yes. And I love how the wings go up once you're cruising, and you can tell how the wings flex, and it's just amazing. Anyway, so we were at cruising altitude, and I noticed I was kind of dozing out with my eyes closed, and I noticed that we make a huge bank to the left. And I'm like, that's kind of odd. We were over the British Islands and, about to get into what they call it, the transatlantic route. So before you enter into the Atlantic. And I'm like, that's a very pronounced, deep turn. I opened the window and I immediately saw some fuel being dumped, from the wing. Again, knowledge is power. How did I know that it was fuel? I read it before. I saw it. It was not wind, it was just fuel coming out. And I'm like, this doesn't look good. The moment that I said that, the pilot came up very calmly. He said, you know what, we are going to be diverting to Glasgow, which is the last airport before we cross the Atlantic. because we got a mechanical emergency. Everything is totally fine. We are going to do a normal landing. It's just that it's safer for us, to take care for our mechanics to take care of this in the ground rather than do it over intercom while we're crossing the Atlantic.
Martin, let me just wrap up some very important things that you said until now, because you have so much knowledge and you could capture so many things that I would like to emphasize. First of all, Martin is right. The Dreamliner, the 787, has a very smooth way of flying because of two main features. Actually, three. The first one being a large plane. Large planes have a greater mass, and therefore they are less jumping in the same turbulence that other smaller planes would jump. By the way, it has nothing to do with safety. Safety-wise, all the planes are okay. But if you are talking about feeling good, then it's a heavy plane. Second thing, what Martin said is the wings. The wings are very, very flexible, and they are absorbing some of the turbulence. I don't know, Martin, if you knew, the wing tip of a 787 can move up and down on a span of how much? Okay, how much you know?
I don't know how much, but I've seen it going up and down.
26 feet.
Wow.
It's amazing.
Wow.
26 feet. I never saw it that much, but it is very flexible, so it absorbs some of the turbulence. And the third thing, it's a special feature of the flight control who tries to counter the jumps. It is totally automatic. The pilot doesn't do anything, but it reduces the jolts or the turbulence that we can feel. That's one thing. Second thing, remember, guys, when there is an emergency or an abnormal situation, you can expect the pilot to come up on the public address system and tell you about it. So if you feel that something is bad, but for example, the flight attendants are still giving you food or selling duty-free items, there is no emergency going on. Quite soon after an emergency is identified, the cabin crew will start to prepare, and the captain will tell you about it. You haven't heard about it? There is no problem there. And the third thing that Martin just said is that he knew that in order to land sooner than expected, the pilot should dump fuel to reduce the weight of the plane. It's not that, oh my God, we're losing all the fuel. He knew what was happening, and therefore he did not panic and could interpret what the signs were there. So these are the main things that I wanted to capture at this time. But by the way, what was the problem? Did they tell you at that time?
Yeah. If you don't mind, I was going to continue so that way, I can wrap it up and tell you. But so rather than panicking, I don't know why. I mean, I was just completely in awe that I'm like, you're not going to believe this. The first thing that came to my mind, I'm going to get to know a new place. I never been to Glasgow. And then I'm thinking to myself, my other part, the fearful part of Martin, are you kidding me? This is an emergency. And the logical part says, it doesn't look like one. Plane is flying totally normal. It's very gliding. It's totally nice. I look up the window. I'm like, you know what? The landscape is just beautiful. The bad part of Martin. But it's an emergency. The good part of Martin is not. Look at down there. Nobody's running. Nobody's yelling. So finally, you know what I mean? We landed. When we landed, the plane did a hard stop and stood in the runway, which I never experienced before. Then I learned why. We were surrounded by a lot of, trucks, for the fire department. And they were all, instead of with water or the foam that you see in the movies, nothing like that. They were with heat cameras. trying to capture if there was any heat coming from anywhere in the plane. Once we gave the okay from the fire marshal, the plane was parked in a remote area of the airport. And for those that they never been to Glasgow, it's a smaller airport, only one runway, actually two, because one runway is considered two because it goes both ways. Yes. But it's a small airport. We parked far, and we were waiting there to get further instructions because the crew was getting, the hours were continuing to roll. They said, you know what, we are not going to be using the same crew. We are not going to be using the same plane. We will need to sleep one night here. We were all like, yes, because we all wanted to get to see Glasgow. And tomorrow we're going to fly on a different plane. I asked what was the problem. And one of the flight attendants smelled burn in one of the galleys, that it was right in front of where we were. I didn't smell anything, but that automatically clicked, and I'm like, this is the type of procedures that these people have. There's a procedure and everybody followed that. Nobody got into panic. Nobody started running like in the movies, there's fire. Nobody did anything like that. If I would not have seen that bank and everything, I would not have noticed anything wrong. We landed completely perfect. There were some plane spotters that they came to take pictures because American doesn't fly to Glasgow. So it was, you don't see a 787 landing, at that airport every day. And it was great. They put us in a hotel. Following day, we got a great breakfast. We get to see a little bit of the town. Following day, a 777-200 ER came from London, empty. Actually, they had a few engineers that they were coming to fix the other plane. And it took us, to Dallas. And, we landed in Dallas one day after, obviously. But you know what? Everything was safe. It was just normal. Yes. I did talk to the captain when we landed, and the captain with his both hands in the pocket, talking like, you and me right now. It was not like sweating. He was, oh my gosh, thanks God. Nothing. It was just completely normal. Thanks to that person that he made that decision, because at the end of the day, it's up to the captain to make that decision together with his team. Yes. I do read a lot on the Post, and many people are afraid of crossing the Atlantic, thinking, what is going to happen if something happens? Where is this plane going to land? No plane is further away from, and correct me here, Captain, but no plane is further away from 3 hours from an airport.
Over the Atlantic, it's much less, by the way. Over the Atlantic, we seldom reach even an hour and a half from the nearest airport, and that's much better. And I want to tell you a story, and maybe we will compare stories later on. 6.5 years ago, I was a captain on a flight from Venice, Italy to Tel Aviv. And it was in an equal distance from Izmir, Turkey, and Athens, Greece, when I got a phone call from the galley, and the flight attendant told me that she smelled something burning in the galley, like a plastic or something like that. Now, it was a 737, which is and the galley is very close to the cockpit. So I opened the door, and immediately I smelled like, an isolation plastic of something electric. And I saw a little bit of a smoke, in the air. It was not like a lot of smoke, but I saw that there was smoke. Now, if you have to choose, Martin, between seeing in a plane a smoke or flames, what would you choose? Smoke or flames?
Well, neither, but if I have to choose one, the flames will show me where the fire is coming from. The smokes will not.
Spot on. Smoke or a smell of a smoke is something that you don't know where it came from. Now, yeah. I have to correct you. The captain, your captain, did not have any choice. When you have a smell of a smoke, or a smoke, or any hint to a fire that you cannot visually identify and make sure that it was extinguished, you have to declare an emergency and land at the nearest suitable airport. This is not your captain, dear listeners, that will choose, oh, maybe I'm in a hurry home and my wife is waiting me for dinner and I would not turn back. No way. The captain cannot take other decision than landing at the nearest suitable airport after declaring an emergency. So your captain worked exactly by the book, and that's what I did. Before exiting to look at the situation, I told my co-pilot, just check the weather around because we need to land. We will probably need to land. And 12 minutes later, we were on the ground with all the firefighters around us, etc., etc. The same thing that you had, with the one thing that we did not experience. We didn't have to dump fuel. First of all, the 737 does not have the capacity to dump fuel. They only can burn the fuel. And one other thing that I wanted to tell you, Martin, every plane is certified to land at its maximum takeoff weight. However, it is not advisable, and if you can, you would reduce your weight in the way that your captain did. But guys, dear listeners, if you take off in a loaded plane and God forbid somebody has an heart attack or there is a real need to land quickly, the plane can land at any weight. And the last thing is about the Atlantic. People think that if I'm flying from Frankfurt to Dallas or some other place, then it's a 12-hour flight and we are 12 hours away from an airport. No way. First of all, the first 6 hours you can return back and the last one you can continue. But over the Atlantic, there are airports in which you can land, and you are never more than an hour and 20 minutes or hour and a half between airports. It's not the same situation if you're flying over the Pacific for Hawaii, for example. There you need to use all the 3 hours that are permissible for airplanes to be away from an airport. So Martin, you landed in Glasgow. You were obviously on top of the things. You knew exactly what was happening. You understood it, so you didn't have anxiety. Were there people around you that were fearful, or everybody was calm or whatever?
Captain and all the listeners, it was such a normal landing. It was such a normal approach and landing. The movies, they do a great job at creating all these Hollywood-esque scenes that they need to in order to capture you. In my particular emergency, it was a normal landing. If I would have been completely asleep, I would have never known. It just landed up perfect. The only difference is that when it landed, it just did a hard stop. Usually you're used to, do the stop and then continue the roll that they call it. And then, you just get off, the runway to vacate the runway and, just go, to the taxiway to your gate. This time it's just stop that big bird in the middle of the runway, which made me assume that the airport was closed because of us until, we vacate the runway. I don't know if to call it lucky. I call it, the perfect example of how flying under procedures work. And this was nothing other than that.
In my case, in my story, 2016, it was actually 4th of July, 2016. I came on the public address system and I spoke to the passengers and told them about what we're going to do. And my wife was one of the passengers, and she told me later that nobody was really stressful too much. And actually, at 10,000 feet before landing, I again told the passengers were going to land in Athens very soon. Thank you for cooperation. And one of the passengers that called the flight attendant and said, maybe I still have time for a drink before we land. So obviously there was no panic. And if you guys think that if you happen to find yourself in such a situation, you're going to freak out, no way. Everything is very professional. Everything is well held by the hands of the cabin crew and by the pilots. So most of the chances that if you find yourselves in such a situation, you will be okay for that.
One of the things that I wanted to add is, and that it struck me, after when I was in the hotel and everything, was calmed down. Because I'm not gonna lie, I mean, obviously, it's a stressful situation, especially,
Yes.
for people that, we don't like flying. But after, everything was calmed down, I start thinking about it and, just going back through the steps. And I said, one day, when I put the post, I'm gonna post it, and I'm gonna say, this plane landed because of an emergency and follow the procedures, but it was a mechanical emergency. At no point, and this is one of the fears that 90% of people have, me one of them, which is turbulence. The plane didn't land because of turbulence.
No.
The plane didn't land. That was not an emergency because of turbulence. So what is that teaching us? That if it really lands because of an emergency, it's because it's something that needs to be taken care of. And there's an army of people following that plane to make sure that that plane, gets at this destination safe. That's exactly what happened.
Yeah. And again, it's a point to emphasize that there has never been an accident of a passenger plane due to turbulence. Turbulence are not comfortable and they may be frightening, etc., but there is no danger in this turbulence. So I think we've covered all the things that we wanted to say, and I think that we've learned a lot of your experience, Martin. Are there any other things that you would like to share before we wrap it up?
Like I said, I mean, you know what? It worked for me, and one of the things that I always like to do, like I'm doing right now, that Captain Alon gave me the opportunity and the space to do, is to try to share experiences. For me, it works to have a window seat. There's something called CAT, which is clear air turbulence,
Yes.
that you feel the plane, shaking pretty bad. But if for me, when I have the window open and I look out and I see what's happening, it can shake as much as it wants. I can see what's happening. It's
Yeah.
not the same if there's a storm outside. I don't like that. But usually, planes don't fly into storms. But being able to see and understand what I am throughout the flight helps me a lot. So if that helps, some of you, at least try it. It helped me.
Yes, and there is a good explanation to why it is good for you, and that's because our minds are deceiving us during turbulence unless we can see the outer world, which sort of aligns us with the world. And if you want to learn more about what's causing our minds to be deceived during turbulence, look at SimpliFly at the clip of turbulence, in which we explain exactly what's happening in our brains and how our vestibular system is tricking us while we are on planes. This will help you and give you some good advice how to cope with this. Opening the window in a clear day and looking outside is definitely a very, very good tip. So I think we've reached the final point of this podcast. And I want to remind us all that flying is still the safest way to travel. And I would say even one of the safest activities to do. But for too many of us, it is still a challenge. We heard today about the way Martin Esquenazi is managing the fear, or actually the discomfort, of flying and confronting it actively, despite some challenging events that he was exposed to. Martin, I'm sure that the point of view that you have shared with us and the many tips that you shared with us will be very important to our listeners. I personally enjoyed our conversation. I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time and joining us today.
Thank you so much, Captain Alon. Again, what you're doing, for everyone, who is not comfortable, flying is just amazing. I do have your app, it's one of my favorites, on my phone. So I recommend, everybody, to have it. And again, this is not, advertising. It's true. It really helped me a lot. That's how, I end up, getting to know Captain Alon. And I'm looking forward, to fly one of those, El Al, 787s, to the Middle East.
And thank you guys for listening to us today. As always, please feel free to write to me and suggest discussion items or even volunteer to be hosted here and talk with me in front of all these guys in the back. Don't forget to follow us on Spotify and recommend us to your friends and relatives. Remember, there are many people who suffer the fear of flying and can benefit from listening to us and using SimpliFly, which is available to download in App Store and in Google Play. Take care and don't stop flying. Thank you. Bye-bye.